What is a forecast? A forecast is a model that attempts to predict future events. Whether that is a weather forecast, that is the most common and typically the first thing people see on their local news, or an economics forecast, where people look at demographics, they look at the market trends and other data that they think is going in a particular direction. If the trends hold up, they think that a certain event, a certain stock, a certain thing will take place. They try to forecast that initially before it comes to fruition. That is what I am simply attempting to do, basing my observations on the current political climate, the current societal climate, the current rhetoric that is coming from the media and entertainment industries. Basically, the media speaks as doing the bidding for the ruling class. Anytime you hear something in the mainstream media, it is there because someone in the ruling class wants it there. What I can see is the attempted delegitimation of the United States. The United States is racist, sexist, homophobic, bigoted, and so on and so forth. As a result, they are speaking to the disenfranchised individuals in the country in hopes that they can restructure this country from its founding. The only way they can do that is to first speak to individuals that feel dissatisfied with the system, their individual lives, their current economic and societal situations. And then the second thing they must do is try and delegitimize, demonize, criticize the current system, the founding of the United States, the institutions like capitalism that the United States are based upon. If you look at all of the reasons America is great today, it begins with the structure. The structure is the political government that we have. If we had a dictator like Communist China, if we did not have the freedom of speech we have, America would not be great, and certainly not as great as it is today. Think about this. You can publicly state your opinion, even if it is derogatory about a political leader. You can broadcast that on live television. You can say that in a public or private forum without fear of pushback, other than someone might debate you, but you will have no government intervention. You have the right to worship how you please, or to not worship at all. People have the right to go to church on Sunday mornings and worship. Not every country has that. You have the right, when you are being searched by a police officer, to demand a warrant and probable cause. Police can't just search you without having a probable cause. You have the right to choose what particular place you want to work at. You are not forced to work as a slave. You are not forced to work in slave labor. All of these things are built upon the foundations that were laid by the founding. the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, which was passed during the first congressional session during George Washington's presidency, and the capitalist system, which Hamilton was instrumental in founding. We became an industrial powerhouse, particularly during the 1900s and after World War II, when American manufacturing was taking off like a rocket, as a result of the foundation that was laid by Alexander Hamilton and was endorsed by George Washington. They must demonize all of those things. Eventually, they will have to demonize George Washington because he is a microcosm of everything the United States stands for. There is some ammo that I know they will use that is readily available to them. Their behavior is so predictable. It is so elementary. They literally appeal to the lowest common denominator rather than trying to make a case based upon their particular policies. All of this is part of a bigger picture. The ruling class distributes content through the media, entertainment, all of their particular venues, in order to protect their interest and their stated goals. One of their goals is they want power over every individual through a one world government. That's why they want to destroy the principles of the United States. They want to take over more power of the United States. Think about it. If the government controls your health care, your education, it takes more out of your wallet, and so on and so forth, it increases its infrastructure. And when it increases its infrastructure, it has more power over your individual life. Also, if you flood our country with immigrants who do not assimilate to the culture, language, traditions, customs, borders, so on and so forth, if you remove all those things, as the great Michael Savage says, language, borders, culture are what defines a country. That's what the great Dr. Savage likes to say. When you get rid of all those things, America no longer exists as a country. When America no longer exists and you change the landscape, it is the same as any other country. When you can break the power of the United States, you can increase your ability to make decisions over the individual's lives, economically, when it comes to your health care, when it comes to your tax money. You have the infrastructure in place for a quasi-dictatorship. Now let's get to George Washington. George Washington is the reason we do not have a monarch. Right after winning the war for independence, George Washington made a speech to his soldiers and then promptly resigned power, which was unique. No other person in history besides maybe an individual in the Roman Empire whose name has left me temporarily has willingly given up power. Washington could have been a king if he wanted to, like Oliver Cromwell became a monarch. But all he did was resign power. He was instrumental in providing societal support for passing the Constitution at the Constitutional Convention. He would go out of his way to make sure he did not appear as a monarch, that he did not appear as an individual who wanted to rule over people's individual lives. The modern presidency is a manifestation of Washington. There's also a famous story about how John Adams, the vice president and the second president, wanted the president to be referred to as His Benign Honorable Majesty. And George Washington didn't like that very much. He just preferred Mr. President, and the name stuck. Even in particular incidents that seemed very trivial, that were very inconsequential, there at one time was an outbreak of yellow fever. This became an epidemic in Philadelphia. Washington wanted to change the meeting place for Congress when they were in recess, but he did not know if he had the authority to do so because it was not outlined in the Constitution. He met with his cabinet, Hamilton, Jefferson, and so on and so forth, in order to ask them what they would do in this particular situation. Of course, they were fine with him moving temporarily, changing the location. But that's just symbolic of how Washington went out of his way to accommodate, to prove that he was not trying to be a dictator. He actually did not want power. In fact, he did not want to be president. He said, after his first inauguration, he wrote Lafayette, "I feel like I'm going to the gallows." And a person is something to the extent of, "I feel like I'm a convicted criminal that is headed towards the gallows." There was another instance where he received a gift from a French diplomat. He asked Congress what they wanted him to do with it. They decided it was no big deal if he took it, so he opened it up, but only after asking permission first. The reason, like I said, that we have the modern presidency, not a king, not a dictator, not a tyrannical ruler over our lives, is because George Washington. And our current system with our checks and balances that were established by the Constitution, you do not have a possibility of ever having a dictator, for the simple fact that you have laws that are passed by the legislative branch. Without Washington, we would not have that. He did not want to run for a second term. He wanted to leave office. Each time he did not want power, but he felt like if he wasn't the one that would sacrifice, our country as a whole might fail. Other than Trump, before Trump, he was the richest person to ever become president when you curb inflation. The only thing that he got was a salary. The reason he took a salary is because he didn't want to be susceptible to bribes. That was the reason he decided that the president should take a salary. Not only did he develop, along with many others like Madison, Hamilton, and Jefferson, the structure of government, the legislative bodies, and so on and so forth, but the ceremonial customs of the president. If any man was dressed in proper attire on every Tuesday afternoon, they could meet the president. They would line up in circles. Washington would bow to each man. Think about this. This dude could have been a king, and he was literally going out of his way to meet these people, these common people. He would bow to them. He would say a word to each one of them personally. He would conversate with them a little bit. Then he would do his final bow, and he would leave the room. He was very accessible to anyone who wanted to see him. I'm just pointing all this out to show you that our very standard of living, our very way of life is because of Washington. If we did not have freedom, we would never have innovation. Tesla, Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, all of these great inventors would not have had the freedom, would have not had the groundwork, the framework, the foundation in order to achieve what they did that innovated us to a whole new level. It all begins with Washington and the founders. There are a few pieces of ammo that they will use. They are so predictable. They do not innovate new things. It's not like, because think about this, they're appealing to the lowest common disenfranchised person. They're not trying to appeal to a rational person like you or me. They're trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator, which doesn't take logic or facts. Washington first was a straight white male, which in their opinion is negative. They claim to be against racism and sexism, even though they are the ones who bring up a straight white male all the time in negative connotations. They are the racist and sexist, but they're trying to project that onto us. It's like a boomerang. They're trying to boomerang that back at us when they are the ones who are racist and sexist. He's a straight white male. He owned slaves. And also, in the Ohio River Valley, there were Indian settlements. Washington raised a military of 4,000 people. They decimated particular Indian tribes. Afterwards, Washington negotiated with them, and being the astute, four-dimensional thinker he was when it came to public relations, he brought the chiefs to the White House. He gave them a medal. On the medal, it depicted the chief wearing a common garb that the European settlers would wear. And in the background, it showed a projection of a European settler toiling the fields, sort of like Washington was projecting his own ideas of the settlements. He preferred that the Europeans would settle on those particular areas. That's kind of the first "who's your daddy, bitch" in history. That's one of the first, kind of rubbing it into him, I guess you could say. The reason I am predicting this is the current climate. When you start removing statues of Confederate generals under the guise of ending racism, even though I fail to see how removing a statue could end racism at all, when you try to change the name of Christopher Columbus Day to National Indigenous People Day, when you, as a state, which Virginia is doing, refuse to celebrate Thomas Jefferson's birthday as a holiday because he was a slave owner, this is all leading to the elite's goal of delegitimizing the founding of the country, delegitimizing the founders themselves because they laid the framework for what this country currently is, ending the borders, language, culture, as the great Dr. Savage likes to say, changing the identity of the country, and ending Western civilization itself, increasing the size and scope of the government, their power over you, economic, social, political, so on and so forth, and then the ruling class can come in, take over, and establish a one world government. That's why you got to be a four-dimensional thinker. You got to think beyond what people are saying. Look at their actions. Look at who benefits from their particular actions. Look at what they're doing. Become more astute. Do not look at things from a surface level. But that is my prediction. The future climate will start demonize George Washington. You wait and see. A white male racist slave owner who killed Native Americans so white people could settle on Indian land. See, this whole country is illegitimate. We evil white Europeans stole this land from the Indians. So even the beginning of this country is illegitimate. And by the way, I almost forgot about this. Washington made derogatory comments against African Americans. So they're going to use all that because they're so damn predictable to delegitimize George Washington, delegitimize the founding, delegitimize the country, and delegitimize the institutions it was built upon.